On this program, we often consider the fall of print journalism, the rise of digital media, to understand what it means for our democracy. Today, we add to that effort by hearing from a man whose career is the very story of that transformation. Stephen Shepard made his first $50 in journalism in 1960 when an article he wrote for a quarterly called The City College Vector got reprinted in Science Digest. Today, he is the founding dean of the highly digital Graduate School of Journalism here at the City University. In between, Shepard was for 2 decades editor-in-chief of Business Week, national editor of Newsweek, editor of the Saturday Review, and more. It's all detailed in a new memoir entitled Deadlines and Disruptions, My Turbulent Path from Print to Digital. Steve Shepard, welcome.
Thank you very much, Brian. Nice to be here.
So since we're on between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, you tell the story in the book of your father dispatching you on the sly on a Jewish holiday to buy a New York Times.
Yes. Well, my father was very, very interested in politics and very, very interested in sports. So naturally, he devoured media. He would listen to the 6 o'clock news on the radio, and he didn't want to miss the New York Times any day. But on Yom Kippur, he spent the whole day in synagogue and fasting, and it was a serious holiday. And so he would tell me as a little boy, he gave me a nickel to go to Kingsbridge Road in the Bronx to buy the New York Times, but hide it under my jacket so no one would see that I had committed an act of commerce on the holiest day of the year.
And you weren't going directly into journalism. You were a science guy first.
Yeah, I studied engineering in college and in fact got a master's degree in engineering from Columbia. You know, for not the best of reasons. It was the post-Sputnik era. My uncle was an engineer, and I was sort of afraid to be a journalist. I didn't know what it meant. So I started out used my engineering training to start out as a science writer, which is what the Science Digest article was about.
And what was it actually about? Do you remember?
The Science Digest?
Yeah.
Oh, of course. Your first article you always remember.
Of course.
Like your first love. It was called The Eyes and Ears of a Missile, and it was how we manufactured parts in these clean rooms, mostly in California, for missile technology, a form of manufacturing that we had never seen before, and that was what the story was about.
And we actually need more people like that in journalism today, don't we? People with a science or a technical understanding in our science-drenched and technology-drenched world.
We need people who are versed in science, we need people who've studied economics, we need philosophers, we need history majors. Yeah, I mean, knowing content is very, very important to do journalism.
You were a reporter at Business Week long before you were the boss. Tell us about the cover story you did regarding Union Carbide that really helped to put you and your career on the map.
Think back to 1970. I was dispatched, I was a young reporter, I was dispatched to a town in West Virginia called Alloy, West Virginia. It was called Alloy because the centerpiece of the town was a ferroalloy smelting plant run by Union Carbide. It was considered the dirtiest factory in the United States, and it was an early test of the ground level power of local environmentalists. Ralph Nader was involved, and environmental regulators versus an intransigent corporation.
And you give a very visual description in the book of what that town looked like when you walked in, which was what?
It wasn't on any local map even. There was just nothing there except this big smelting plant. And I went down there twice. I interviewed all kinds of local people, environmentalists, regulators, and so on, and the company as well, and wrote a cover story called A Corporate Polluter Learns the Hard Way. And 4 years later, I went back, and they had cleaned up the plant in Alloy. It was a remarkable test of the strength of government regulation to bring about social good.
And so is the relationship between that and journalism today the fact that there were many well-funded newsrooms with lots of editors to take in the work of young reporters and make sure they're right and make sure they're told well, bureaus around the world? Is that a comparison worth making?
Sure is. In those days and well into the late 90s and early 2000s, journalism was pretty well staffed in this country. When I was the editor of Business Week, we had 250 people, full-time people on the editorial staff of the magazine. We had bureaus all around the world. We had the resources to send people and do stories. And as the world changed on us, a lot of magazines and newspapers have had to cut back, and so they have much less journalistic muscle to do these kind of stories. The other thing that's disappeared is the mentoring that we got as young people from senior people on the staff. These days, the staffs are so small, they have to not only put out their newspaper or magazine, but they have to blog and do podcasts and so on. And there's really no time to train young people.
I think it's fair to say that with the explosion of the web and mobile technology and everything else, there's a tremendous amount of journalism, or at least writing, being consumed. I think it's accurate to say that there are more people reading New York Times articles today than there were before the web, just to take one publication's example. But that doesn't mean that they can make money at it in the same way.
Yeah, that's the problem. Yeah, more people consume the New York Times today. One statistic that always gets me is that a New York Times story is tweeted every 4 seconds. And so the use of social media and the web has distributed journalism much more widely. It's a much more decentralized, much more democratized process because people can now talk back. So I don't think the problem is journalism per se. There's more journalism being done today by more people on more platforms than ever before. The problem is, how do we support financially quality journalism in the digital age, because the traditional business model of journalism has collapsed.
The traditional business model of journalism has collapsed, but isn't one going to be invented? I say this as an optimist, not as somebody who has a crystal ball. If there are so many people reading so much journalism today and distributing it themselves via Twitter, via Facebook, via whatever, that there's some way that news organizations can reasonably monetize their own content, as they did in the past through advertising and newspaper and magazine sales?
Yeah, one hopes that's the case. If you look at the traditional business model, typically on a print product, newspapers, magazines, let me talk about that because I know them so well, 20% of the revenue came from circulation and 80% came from advertising. Well, in this world, there's very little income from circulation because content is largely free on the web. And the advertising has collapsed because ad rates are so low on the web. They're still higher in print, but it's disappearing in print. So what we have to do is charge people for content, and it's good to see that some newspapers, about 25% of newspapers in the United States, are starting to charge readers now. And we have to get advertising rates up online, which can be done. But we have to change the way we're selling advertising. It can't be done by the volume of the traffic. It's very hard to monetize traffic. You have to have sponsorships. It's a little more like the TV model. You have to target people with your advertising. The internet is about targeting and personalization. That's what it can do that nothing else can do. And advertisers want to reach customers who are interested in what they have to sell. The media companies are not yet doing a good enough job of targeting advertising and content onto interested people. And
so at the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism, one of the main things that you teach, or one of the things that the school is getting known for, is teaching entrepreneurial journalism.
Yeah. We define entrepreneurial journalism as a fusion of journalism, business, and technology. And we're trying to get our students to understand that they have to take responsibility not just for the journalism side of the product, but also the business side. And I don't mean we need to break down the walls between church and state, advertising and editorial. I just mean they need to be involved in new product development, developing new business models for their audiences, and so on. We've gotten to the point where we now teach everybody to be a convergent journalist. We teach the eternal verities, reporting, writing, critical thinking, ethical values, and we teach all the interactive multimedia stuff. But in addition, now we're trying to say, you have to take responsibility for the financial success of this journalistic enterprise, otherwise it isn't going to succeed.
What do you say to maybe the old line journalists or others who are skeptical of the term entrepreneurial journalism and think, wait a minute, journalism is a higher calling. This is not about figuring out how to make a buck.
Well, in order to serve a higher calling, you have to make a buck because it's not sustainable unless there's profit. The revenue has to exceed the cost in any operation. I don't care if you're a nonprofit or a profit maker. Otherwise it goes out of business. It ceases to exist. So what I say to people who are skeptical about this is, look, we want you to do journalism just the way you've always done it. We don't want you to pay attention to advertising considerations. Go and do the best possible stories. But somebody has to be thinking about the sustainability of this as a business.
Are you hopeful? Are you optimistic? Are you sad about the changes in journalism in your lifetime?
Depends on which day you get me. I'm optimistic sometimes, and sometimes I worry a lot more. I'm sad by it because, you know, one of the things that's difficult for me and traditional journalists who grew up in the world that I grew up and have to make the transition to the new world is that we've sort of been dethroned. You know, in the old world, we took great pride in our professionalism in sorting out what was important for you, the readers. And we gave it meaning and context and synthesis and understanding, and on our best days, something approaching wisdom. Then the world changed on us and it became a two-way street. It wasn't just a product, it was a process. It was a conversation with the audience. Anybody could be a journalist, or at least commit an act of journalism. And we were kind of dethroned, and it was a tough transition psychologically for people like me. And thank God for the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism, because I was able to stay with the young people and learn how to do it and learn what it was all about and learn why it was important.
You can read a lot about that transition in Steve Shepard's life and in the life of our country in his new book, Deadlines and Disruption, My Turbulent Path from Print to Journalism. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian.